Picture 500 people landing on your pricing page and only 40 of them starting checkout. That's an 88% drop-off at a single step, and if you run a small business, you've probably stared at a number exactly like that one and wondered what it actually means and what, if anything, you're supposed to do about it. I run a few small businesses of numbers exactly like this one, and for years I made the same mistake every single time a drop-off number looked ugly. I treated the percentage itself as the diagnosis. It isn't. It's a symptom. It tells you where to look, not what's wrong, and mixing those two up is how you end up fixing the wrong thing with real time and real money. A funnel is just a sequence of steps someone has to complete before they become whatever you're counting as a win. A sign up, a paid customer, a book call, whatever the actual outcome is for your business. Drop off is the gap between how many people enter a step and how many make it to the next one. Counting that gap is the easy part. Any analytics tool hands you the percentages for free without you asking twice. The hard part, the part almost everyone skips, is figuring out what the number is actually telling you before you go and change something based on it. Before you can diagnose any of this, you need an honest map of the steps a person actually goes through, not the steps you assume they go through. This sounds obvious, and it's still the step people skip the most, because drawing the real funnel is slower and less satisfying than just staring at one big conversion rate. For a small SaaS product, the real funnel usually looks something like this: an ad or search click, a landing page, a sign-up form, an email verification, a first login, a first meaningful action inside the product, and an upgrade to paid. That's 7 steps, not 2, and each one can fail for a completely different reason. If you only track visitors and customers, you're averaging 7 different failure points into one blended number. And that number can't tell you whether your problem lives on the landing page or 3 steps later in onboarding. So write the steps down on paper or in a doc, plainly in order. Use wherever your customers actually click through, not the flow that lives in your head or the flow you originally designed. If you don't know the exact steps a customer takes through your own product, that's the first thing to fix before you touch a single metric. Once you've mapped the funnel, calculate the conversion rate between each consecutive pair of steps, not just the rate from the very top to the very bottom. A single blended number hides exactly where the real problem lives, the same way an average hides the difference between 2 very different groups sitting inside it. Say a landing page converts 30% of visitors to sign up, then only 15% of those verify their email, then 70% of verified users finish onboarding. The overall visitor to onboarded rate looks awful, maybe 3%, and it's tempting to conclude the whole funnel is broken and needs a rebuild from the top down. But look at the step-by-step numbers again, and the data is actually pointing at one specific step: email verification. That's a much smaller, much more solvable problem than our funnel doesn't work. Maybe the email lands in spam. Maybe the link expires too fast. Maybe the copy is confusing about what to do next once someone opens it. Each of those has a concrete, testable fix, and none of them require touching the landing page at all. This is the core discipline of diagnosing drop-off. Resist the urge to explain the whole funnel with one tidy story, because a tidy story is comfortable and is usually wrong. Find the step with the worst relative drop, compared to what you'd expect at that stage, and start there before you touch anything else. A few patterns show up often enough across small businesses that they're worth naming out loud, though which one applies to you is something only your own data can tell you, not a list like this one. Drop off right after a form usually points to friction in the form itself. Too many fields, a confusing label, a required field that honestly shouldn't be required at all. It's often the cheapest thing to test, because the fix is small and the step is early, so even a modest improvement there compounds through everything that comes after it. Drop off between sign up and first login often points to a broken or delayed confirmation step, not a lack of interest on the customer's part. Someone who filled out a form already showed you they wanted in. If they don't come back, check whether the confirmation email actually arrives, how fast it arrives, and whether the next step is obvious the moment they're in, instead of assuming they simply changed their mind. Drop off between first login and the first meaningful action usually points to onboarding, not acquisition. The person showed up, they're just not sure what to do once they're there. This is where I've personally seen the biggest swings from the smallest changes, because the person is already present and already willing. They just need a clearer next step, not more marketing spend pointed at the top of the funnel. Drop off right before payment is different again. By that point, someone has already invested real time and attention. So the drop is more often about price, trust, or a checkout flow that adds unexpected steps or costs at the last second. It's worth checking whether the price shown at checkout actually matches what was promised earlier in the funnel, since mismatches there are more common than people expect, and easy to miss if nobody walks the whole path start to finish. I'm not going to tell you which of these 4 applies to your business, because I don't know your funnel, and honestly, neither does any generic list. Naming them is meant to give you starting hypotheses to test against your own steps, not conclusions to copy and paste straight into a fix. Before you decide a step is broken, split the data by the ways your traffic actually differs: paid versus organic, mobile versus desktop, new visitor versus returning customer. A funnel percentage is an average across everyone who entered it, and averages hide differences that matter a great deal once you actually look for them. It's common for a step to look perfectly fine in aggregate, while one segment is quietly dragging it down badly underneath. A checkout step might convert well on desktop and poorly on mobile, simply because a button is hard to tap with a thumb. Averaged together, that shows up as a mediocre number pointing nowhere in particular. Split apart, it points exactly at a mobile layout problem you can actually go fix this week. I'd also caution against overdoing this in the other direction. If you slice the data into 10 segments with 20 people in each one, you're not looking at a pattern anymore, you're looking at noise dressed up as insight. Segment enough to test a specific hypothesis you already have. Not so much that every group left standing is too small to mean anything at all. Not everyone who fails to convert was ever going to convert in the first place. Some fraction of any funnel is made up of people browsing, comparing you to competitors, or just plain not ready to buy yet. That's normal attrition. And no amount of onboarding polish or clever copy removes it entirely, no matter how good the product is. The way to tell real drop-off from normal attrition is trend, not a snapshot taken on one bad day. If a step has been stable for months and suddenly drops right after a change you made, that's worth acting on quickly. If a step has always converted at roughly the same modest rate, that might just be the natural shape of that part of your business, and chasing it as a problem can burn real time for very little return. I'd also push back on treating any single week's numbers as a verdict either way. Small businesses often don't have enough volume for 1 week of data to be reliable on its own. Look at a longer window before deciding a drop-off is a real new problem and not just ordinary variation working itself out. Once you've found a few steps with real sustained drop-off, you still have to choose where to spend your time, because you probably can't fix everything at once with a small team or a solo operation. A reasonable way to prioritize is to weigh 2 things together: how many people are actually affected at that step, and how close that step sits to the final outcome you care about most. An early step with a lot of volume and a bad drop-off is usually worth fixing first, simply because a small improvement there feeds every single step that comes after it. A step near the end with fewer people but high intent is also worth your attention, since those are people who almost converted and didn't, which is a different kind of loss. Steps sitting in the middle with modest volume and modest drop-off are usually the lowest priority of the 3, even when the raw percentage looks bad sitting there on its own. Here's the part that matters most, and it's the part people forget fastest once they see a chart. A drop-off number tells you where people left. It doesn't tell you why, and that gap is tempting to fill in with whatever story already fits the change you were planning to make anyway, whether or not the story is actually true. To actually understand why, you generally need something beyond the funnel report itself. Watching a handful of session recordings, asking a few real people directly why they stopped partway through, reading support messages from around that stage of the journey. The funnel narrows the search down to a specific place. It doesn't finish the investigation for you, and treating it as though it does is where a lot of wasted effort quietly starts. Tentu kami sana on your preskin tupo and yon sini, rain destined dance. Sometimes the people you lost at a given step were never going to pay you regardless, and improving that step just moves the drop-off further down the funnel instead of actually removing it. Treat every fix as a hypothesis you're testing, not a certainty you're banking on, and check the step right after the one you changed to see whether the improvement genuinely held up over time. Diagnosing funnel drop-off is less about finding one dramatic number and more about building a habit around a few honest steps. Map the real steps a customer takes. Look at each transition on its own instead of one blended average. Segment before you conclude anything about what's actually broken. Separate real signal from normal variation using trend, not a snapshot. Prioritize by volume and by how close a step sits to the outcome you actually care about. None of it requires expensive tooling or a data team. It requires writing the funnel down honestly and looking at it often enough to notice when something genuinely changes. Every one of these explainers lives in writing at dataresearchanalysiscollection.com. The whole metric library, in plain English, laid out the same honest way I just walked through this one, and then used explained in writing at dataresearchanalysiscollection.com. If this kind of plain English breakdown is useful to you, go have a look and subscribe for more.